Listeners, welcome back to Tumor Board with Hilario and Anish. I'm your co-host, Anish.
And this is Hilario. So this week, we wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about a very important topic in medicine. If you are around a lot of physicians, you've heard a lot about physician burnout, and really, it's a topic that affects people in healthcare in general. And I'm sure for other people in other professional studies, there is a form of burnout in it. But we wanted this week to kind of talk a little bit about what burnout looks like in medicine. And maybe hopefully by the end of this two-part series, we can give you a sense of what burnout is and, some of the signs that we can identify within ourselves and our colleagues. And hopefully end this series with offering some solutions that we think may be helpful for some people when it comes to burnout. So, Anish, just to kind of give us an overview of what burnout is, how would you define burnout?
The American Medical Association, the largest medical organization for physicians, defines physician burnout as a long-term stress reaction. This can include emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. In other words, the physician basically losing empathy for patients or perhaps having a negative attitude toward patients and not really seeing patients in a capacity where they want to do their best to help them. Additionally, this may also include feelings of decreased personal achievement. Burnout is a condition that affects all specialties in all practice settings, whether private practice, academic, small, network of hospital, any setting.
Right. And I imagine that even though it's prevalent in all the specialties, and we'll probably go through some of that, but every specialty is probably going to look a little bit different in terms of how severe it can be and some of the things in that specialty that lends itself to burnout, correct?
Yes, definitely correct.
All right, putting some numbers on, burnout and its prevalence. So since 2011, the AMA kind of has been working with this group where they've been looking at, physician burnout, the prevalence of physician burnout, and every few years or so, they've been updating this survey that they send out to physicians to kind of get an idea of where they are at in terms of burnout. So they started out, like I said, in 2011, and in 2021, within the pandemic, they really wanted to see how the pandemic may have influenced some of these patterns that we see when it comes to burnout. So they've been doing is sending out, survey requests to the database of all physicians in the AMA, right? And, they get some people responding to these surveys. And in the 2021, they had maybe like 2,400 people that responded. And, essentially the patterns that has been seen, previously are still there, but they're seeing that up to 60% of physicians have at least one manifestation of burnout in 2021, which actually has gone up. It's almost double what it was in 2020. And in 2017, it was around 40%. And then in 2014, actually, it was 50-something%. And then 2011, which is when they started, it was about 45%. So if you collectively kind of draw the map of how this is going, like in 2021, you can see how COVID may have affected physicians in terms of burnout. So up to 60-something% of them, experience some level of burnout. They did look at some, metrics within burnout, because we talked about how people can get emotionally exhausted, depersonalization, and not really feeling fulfilled in the workplace. So looking at the satisfaction with work-life integration, which essentially is like work-life balance, right? Being able to feel like you're able to get away from work and also have a life at home. Looking at that kind of satisfaction had declined from 46% in previous years to about 30% in around 2021. And then when it comes to depression, depression increased 6% from 2020 to 2021. But just for some background, about half of physicians, report some depression based on this group of people that were surveyed, right? And then when you think about emotional exhaustion, right? Emotional exhaustion also increased about 38%, from prior years. Depersonalization, which is where people just essentially are trying distancing themselves emotionally from patient, right? Where there's no empathy expressed over time, and they have negative attitudes towards the patient. That increased by 60%. All right. So this was shown to be sort of consistent in terms of the increase across all the specialties. But Anish, you talked to us a little bit about how this looks like in some of the other specialties as well, right?
Yeah, first of all, that study is really, really interesting, and the numbers are pretty crazy. I mean, 60% have at least one manifestation of burnout, and
Right.
yeah, there's a large study or survey by Medscape. If you're not familiar with Medscape is basically one of the largest networks for physicians, and they did a survey in 2021, and they surveyed about 13,000 doctors across about 30 specialties. Now, overall, almost 50% reported feeling burnout. And the specialty with the most amount of burnout, Hilario, what is your guess?
I'll say emergency medicine, right? Because I feel like everybody is coming in with some acute issue in the ED, and then it can get very overwhelmed. I feel like in the ED, for people who don't have insurance and all that stuff, that's their primary care. So ED physicians probably like face a lot, see a whole slew of people with from different social backgrounds, different issues, right? So I feel like if anybody is gonna feel the brunt of burnout, those are gonna be the group of physicians, right?
Yes, that is completely correct. Emergency medicine was ranked as a specialty with the highest amount of burnout. Almost 60% of physicians reported that burnout. What was interesting next was critical care. I think in our field, oncology, they didn't separate out radiation oncology and the rest of oncology, but oncology was about 36%. So still a fairly high number.
Right, that's like a third of us, right? That express some level of burnout. And I actually think that these numbers are like underreported, right? Because a whole lot of people who are burned out, first of all, probably wouldn't want to fill out a survey, right? So there's going to be a good number of them that probably do not want to fill out a survey. And then there's going to be a good number of us that also do not really want to say that we're burnt out, right? Because there's this also idea in medicine that people really don't talk about what people will perceive as weakness, right? So I suspect the number is probably a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, there are stages in terms of assessing burnout and kind of the stages of developing that burnout. So first, stage one is called the honeymoon phase. You start your job, you start your training, and you're enthusiastic and you want to work, you want to do your best. But then you start doing a little bit more, then you get to stage two, which is onset of stress in a stage of stagnation. So you feel like maybe you're not making the impact you want to. You feel like maybe you're not learning as much, and you've stagnated. And that's when the stresses start. And a lot of times the physical stress can start. Perhaps you're working late hours, long, a number of days during the week, and you're just not able to relieve that stress. This then transitions to stage three, which is chronic stress. And then, that physician becomes frustrated. The mental and emotional exhaustion start really coming into play. And whether it's that feeling of helplessness, that you're not making impact, is more higher than it used to be. All the factors we're going to get into later about kind of what causes burnout, but they start becoming more chronic and they just stay within your body and within your mind. Then you start getting to stage 4, which is apathy. And that's when you're really burned out and you don't care about anything. You don't care about your patient. You're just kind of doing the job just to do the job, but you don't actually really care about what you're doing and doing it to the best of your capabilities.
Right. And I feel like there's some form level of like, not feeling fulfilled too, right? Because it might not just be like you're apathetic where you lost interest in what you're doing, but the thing that I feel like a lot of us went into medicine because we want to help people, right?
Yeah.
But when you're apathetic, that thing, that caring for people probably doesn't fulfill you anymore. So, that really is like one of the classic signs I say of burnout. All right.
Yeah. And I think about those times when, I just feel so tired. I feel burned out. I just want to get home and I just want to get the job done and leave. So
Right.
exactly what you're saying. And, when that starts building up, you get to stage 5, which is habitual burnout. And that's when that burnout, there's never really intermittent periods of no burnout. You are just always burned out.
So that's very enlightening because you can kind of see how this slowly builds up. All right, it starts with just losing enthusiasm for the things that like got you into medicine, and I feel like everything when it starts off with like, let's say, bad habits. It comes with small stresses here and there, and then when they become repeated, right? Like anything, over time it becomes habit, and then you just become this person where you're consistently burnout. You can't seem to really find a way out of that. So you mentioned a little bit about some of the signs, but I think in our communities as physicians, and at least I know within Radon, we try to really be collegial and try to really stay close to
Mm-hmm.
one another, where we're able to kind of help each other. That may not be the case in other specialties, depending on the nature of the job, but I think if you're able to kind of form little communities within your workplace in terms of the people that you work with, that is great. And so that will lend you to be able to kind of like identify some of the signs of burnout in your colleagues, or your colleagues might be able to identify that in you, or you can even identify some of these things in yourself. Because the first thing to actually being able to find help or be able to help yourself is actually noticing changes in your mood and all that kind of stuff, right? So some of the common signs that are associated with burnout, right? People get irritable, and we know people get snappy in the hospital, right? If you're an attendant, a medical student asks you a question, you're so stressed out, you kind of give them some snacky answer, or you don't
We've
even like.
definitely all seen that.
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely seen that, and to some degree, like I sometimes I understand it's like, oh, this attendant is really busy, and the answer they gave me was very rude, right? And I I, I get that. So sometimes I think when I was in med school, I try to kind of distance myself a little away from my attendants, especially when I see that they're super busy. So maybe I saw that I did that more out of fear, but sometimes those are signs of burnout in our attendance. If you're in a resident group, right? Your senior residents like usually have a little more responsibility, right? Especially if you're in medicine. And then the intern, they have to kind of take care of the intern, show them the ropes, right? And then sometimes they're in the hospital for so long, right? So that comes with irritability, right? People get irritable, and when that keeps happening, that really starts becoming a behavior where you're always irritable, right? People withdraw from friends and family. So because the workplace is, they're burnt out from work. When they come home, they don't really engage with family members, right? They don't. They kind of get
Mm-hmm.
within themselves. Don't want to go out, and that may also be that they don't have time. They don't feel like they don't have time to go out and spend that time with family and friends, because when they come home, they're tired, want to go straight to bed, right? But even being able to identify when you have time to be able to see people, when people are burned out, they tend more to withdraw than to try and seek that kind of support, or seek that kind of relationship or fellowship with other people like family and friends. And then this more serious thing is that, with burnout, people get impaired, right? Judgment, it can impair your judgment if you're tired and stressed out. It can lead to mistakes, right? So you see people who are making poor judgment, and that's really not in their nature. That might give you a sense that this person may be going through a little bit more stresses than usual. Unfortunately, some people, it manifests as excessive, like substance abuse, right? People will drink a lot, right? Might be smoking, right? And people who do all sort of risky behaviors because of burnout, right? Another one is that, like, I saw that maybe like a few times in intern year, where someone like personal hygiene really is like, dropping, and it looks
What did you
like
say specifically?
well, there's this, I've mentioned where I went to in 10 years. I don't want to make it kind of
Sure.
too obvious, but people where you can tell that maybe they haven't showered in a while. So
Yeah.
yesterday this person was smelling like that, and like still they haven't really had time to really do that. And some of it comes from people just they have only very little time, right? Maybe they're doing night float or something. They go home, they go to bed. By the time they wake up, it's like 10 minutes before their next shift. They just like come back into the hospital. They didn't shower, they didn't comb their hair, nothing, right? And you can see
Yeah, it's
dandruff
like
like
that physical and emotional, mental exhaustion just making you so tired you're sleeping, right? And it happens.
Right. So I mean, it's not meant to denigrate anyone that is going through that, but that's what happens, and there are some people where that's how burnout manifests, right? So those are things that can really give you a sense of what someone else might be going through. Some people, might start off very capable in terms of managing their emotions and impulses. With burnout, people just can get impulsive and they're not able to manage their emotions as well. So burnout can manifest in a lot of ways, and some people, it might be mood disorders, right? People may get anxiety from being burned out, and the stresses, right? Especially if the stress is coming from your boss or someone or a superior in the workplace that might be intimidating you or whatever at the workplace. People might develop anxieties, thinking about coming back to the workplace the next day when they're home. So, between depression, anxiety, which are some of the mental disorders that associated with burnout, some of it also manifests physically, like we talked about. So, Anish, what do you think are some of the causes of burnout? And I'm sure the answers are varied, but can you give us what you think are the causes of burnout?
Yeah, there are definitely a number of both external factors and internal factors. So external factors are really things that are outside your control, largely these organizational and systemic factors. So number one, administrative burden and documentation. You and I can both attest to the fact that there are so many notes to write, whether it's your actual consult or clinic note when you see the patient. And those are things you just have to do in between seeing other patients, right? You're just there. You might stay late to finish these documentation. I know that we cover a lot of things with our attending and we don't see them, but I know they're also filling out other notes. And so all this administrative burden just continues to increase. And, one thing that I always think is interesting, back before where they didn't have these electronic medical records, you'd sit in the patient room, you'd actually look at the patient and eye to eye. And I try to do my best to do that. But at the same time, I have to keep the chart open so I can type a few things, because I know I may not get to it until much later. I'm going to have to make sure it's all right. And so like I'll
Or
be
you
looking at the
forget,
computer, right?
right?
Or I forget it. So you're
Right.
looking at the computer and you're not looking at them, and then you also feel this like, oh man, I'm not doing my best to, show
Right.
this patient I'm actually caring and paying attention. And I think that
Right.
also adds to things. But
Right.
that administrative burden is huge.
One of the things that I was reading about before this episode was that most physicians spend about half or more of the time that they are at work just like chatting or doing something on EHR, like some form of documentation, and actually very little time is spent talking to the people that we actually want to engage with and help, which is kind of tells you where
Mhm.
we're at. And that actually has increased over the decades. We used to spend more time with our patients and actually kind of connect with them, right?
Mhm.
And now, I feel like we're just kind of a little bit like robots, like just going in there because you want to be able to chat and talk to the patient, but at the same time be documented. So, like you said, administrative burden is really a huge issue.
Right, and that's one of the reasons, scribes, like medical scribes, are a big thing in some places
Right,
because,
right.
like, they want to get someone to do that so the doctor can focus on actual doctor work.
Hmm. Right.
But the next big thing is really the exponential rise in patient calls, emails, and what we call inbox work. So just
Yeah.
different results coming in, and then you having to communicate that.
Right.
And there are a lot of patients calls. They
Right.
happen throughout the day,
Hmm.
and if you are in a outpatient setting where you have patients you're seeing on that same day, but you also have patients you've seen months ago. Um, they're all your patients, and you do have to get back to them. And unfortunately, it may be you, and there's only so much time in the day. And
Right.
focusing on that and not having the staff in place to help you do that can really be a big burden on the doctor.
Right. 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 So, you talking about that, that's actually really interesting. So, I'm taking an MBA in healthcare
Mm-hmm.
management now. And one of the things that, some of the things that I've been reading about, we're generally talking about physician shortage in one of my classes, right? Or physician shortage or healthcare provider shortage, right? And there was this really interesting paper about how, like, even though, looking at patient to provider like ratio, it looks like there's a shortage, right? But there's this belief in some group of people that are really thinking about this. They're like, um, if we can actually, efficiently do this administrative stuff, with the use of health informatics or using AI
Mm-hmm.
to be able to like automatically notify people for things that like a negative that like you don't necessarily have to talk to someone about, right? You don't have to call someone, which takes time because you might call a patient, they don't pick up, and you have to call them again, right? And that all those things you add them up, it's like so much time. You actually add them up, and it actually forms a substantive amount of your day, your
Yeah.
hours that you have in a day, right? So this group of thinkers, what they're doing is that like even hiring people because like if you look at it for physician your time right and how much the hospital pay you right if you're spending your time making phone calls about things that are not critical or not that serious that
Mm-hmm.
requires some a physician to call them right that is a waste of money right because
Yeah.
someone who can better spend their time doing something that their skill actually requires, right? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to call someone to tell them that their lab that they got, let's say a CBC, was normal, right? You don't need to do that, right? And then so they will follow up. You should follow up with your primary care doctor for in 6 months, right? Something like that. That can be done by literally any individual that has been trained for maybe like a few weeks or so, right? Like to
Mm.
how to talk to patient, right? So being able to like figure out and actually stratify the workflow in hospitals and healthcare systems, actually they think that when you do all of that appropriately, and they make these mathematical estimations, when you do all of this appropriately, you're going to find out that the time that physicians actually have to talk to patients and actually engage with them meaningfully, right? Where we actually
Hmm.
spend a little bit more time, right, with them. If you account for the amount of time and the number of patients that we have, there is an argument to be made that there's actually no physician shortage. There's actually no MP shortage, right? There's no nursing shortage because we will be using our resources appropriately, and then we won't be spending so much time doing very mundane things, right? But they obviously talk about how a lot of the things that get in the way of that. One of the big things is litigation, right? Where people feel like if they don't hear from certain people, dissatisfaction in the hospital from patients,
Yeah.
it's going to be poor. But that hasn't really been challenged, and that idea of doing this stratified work hasn't really been done for people to really say people are not satisfied or whatever, right? So
Hmm.
that I felt like that was very tied in into how we can try and use our time wisely and maybe help reduce burnout on a very systemic level, at least in my head.
Exactly. We want the resources to be allocated appropriately, and we want
Right.
our time we spent
Hmm.
and energy we spent to be a physician to be able to
Hmm.
use that skill set and not
Right.
need to waste that on
Hmm.
other things. That's also requires a mental, it takes up space in our brain, takes up space of actual physical time.
Hmm.
So I hope there's a lot of more work that goes into that.
Right. So, I mean, I think we talked about some external factors. So, what what
Yeah,
what are some of the internal factors do you think that contributes to burnout?
I think one of the biggest things is having a very high self expectation
Hmm.
for ourselves. In other words,
Right.
really perfectionism.
Hmm.
We, all of us who have become physicians, we've done our best to work hard from the get go, whether it might have been college when you decided to become a doctor before that, but you've
Yeah.
been studying, you've always trying to push yourself to get the best grades, to do the best in all your activities. That continues to persist in medical school. You need to do your best just for your own self to show that
Hmm.
you can do your best. And that need just feels like it's always cultivated and it continues to be
Hmm.
cultivated and
Right.
it continues to be encouraged. And then you get
Hmm.
to residency, you get to attending hood, and that feeling, that desire is still there. So when you have that desire, you have the high self expectation, but then things don't always go that way in
Right.
terms of the patient care, in terms of you feeling like you're making an impact on patients and being able to get all your work done appropriately, timely manner, and really doing your best. When you're not doing that, because you
Hmm.
can't achieve what you're trying to achieve, then you get burned out. Then it's just kind of this vicious cycle.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the kind of people that go into medicine generally are competitive, right? And they want
Yeah.
to like continue to be better. And I think being wanting to be better at, it's a good thing, but wanting to reach perfection, nobody can be perfect, right? And
Yeah.
there's nobody who is perfect. So I think we can strive to be better, but when we set the goal to be perfect, that's when we run into some of these things. I think
Hmm.
someone said what the enemy of good or better is perfection. So like people getting into our heads that we want to be this perfect doctor, right? So like we don't know when to delegate things, when to even say no, right? To a request, within the workplace where you're not obligated to really say yes to that, right?
But you feel that you
That
have to do it.
Yeah, you feel like you
Yeah.
have to. And I understand some of this is also probably has to do with the culture too, right? That you find yourself in. If everybody is in the mode of doing that, and you might catch the culture and also kind of like fall into line when it comes to that. That's why this is both like on a very systemic level an issue, right? And but at the same time, we do have individual behaviors that may lend us to burnout. And then I'll say that some people might use work also as a substitute for social life, right? And that may be good and everything, but not realizing that if you're not able to distance yourself sometimes from work and have that balance over time, you're gonna burn out. And that's something that is important for one to really understand about themselves and the nature of medicine, as well.
Yeah, work can be fun, but it's definitely not a social life.
Yeah, so we've talked about what burnout is. We put some numbers on the prevalence of burnout. The kind of specialties that really get affected the most with burnout, but really it's a problem in all of medicine. We looked at some of the signs in burnout, how to identify that in yourself and in your colleagues so that we can better help those around us. And some of the causes of burnout, right? In our next episode, what we will be talking about, Anish.
So we're going to talk about, why this burnout matters, our own struggles with burnout, and some solutions to the problem, both on a systemic scale and individually, what we can do. So before we go, Hilario, since we're talking about burnout, is there anything fun or new that you've done recently?
Oh man, so I wouldn't say it is new, but I recently got injured, right, in a soccer injury, and then I was cleared recently to really be able to play soccer again. So
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I played a match this weekend with my team. We lost 3-2, but I scored a goal, and that was a good feeling. So it was good to be able to get back to playing without a whole lot of hesitation. I was playing a little bit before I was fully cleared, but I was always very hesitant because I hadn't really gotten there, go ahead from that standpoint. Another thing that I've been doing, this is earnings season now, right? I don't know if you're an investor, you know that around this time it's like a third quarter, like earnings reports. So I've been listening to some of that, looking at some of my, investments that I've been making and seeing how they're doing, especially in this macroeconomic like downturn that we're hearing a lot about, whether there's going to be a recession or not. So for me, that's fun, and that's something diverts my attention away from work sometimes. So I like doing that kind of stuff. So that's what I've been doing.
Well, that sounds fun. I'm glad you were able to score the goal, and hopefully you made some money or will make money.
Well, it's all about long term. It's all about long term. Yeah. But I am trying to make some money, but also, try to look out for my long term, what's it called, financial independence. So, yeah, I'm into that kind of thing.
Well, hopefully, listeners, you enjoyed our episode about burnout. Tune in next week, and maybe by next week, Hilario will have made some good money. We don't have
that. That is still short term. That is still short term. Ask me in 10 years how much money I've made. All right.
All right.
All right.
See y'all.
All right. See y'all.